Ladies and gentlemen, during this day, we will have 5 main subjects. Each subject will be followed by a panel session led by a CEO from our group companies. All questions raised in Yammer and other media channels will be answered at the end of each session, as per the agenda of this conference. For the first subject, we would like to welcome Engineer Ala Al-Lawati, Acting CEO of Muscat Electricity Distribution Company, to lead the session of Internet of Energy.
Good morning. We will have 2 speakers today for the first subject of the conference. The first will be Ms. Nitu kaushal from Vodafone, and we will be having Mr. Mustafa Aziz from GE. First, I would like to give a brief about Ms. Nitu kaushal. Nitu is the strategic sales leader of the business development function at Vodafone Group, PLC, based out of London, with over 17 years of global telecom experience, stretching across IoT, cloud, unified communications, connectivity, managed services, and management of multiple portfolios with revenue lines of over £250 million per annum. Nitu has been able to address the need of both private and public sectors within enterprise. Nitu's current organization pioneers ways to help customers achieve more through dynamic end-to-end digital solution in manufacturing, smart cities, retail, utilities, healthcare, insurance, automotive, and many more verticals through the Internet of Things-based technologies. Nitu is also a winner of the Top 35 Females Award at Vodafone Group Enterprise, regularly speaks at industry events and lectures at global business schools. So, welcome, Nitu.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. Whilst we're waiting for the little clicker to come through so that I can whiz through these slides, just a short introduction on Vodafone. Vodafone is a global mobile operator that has expanded outside of traditional mobile services. We operate across 27 different countries, and in the countries which are not our home markets, we partner with many other telecoms operators. We actually work across every single vertical, and it's really interesting to see that even though utilities is a very slow vertical in terms of technology adoption, we've actually seen the biggest growth happening in utilities. They are one of the initial adopters for Internet of Things, in the previous life called machine to machine. So what I wanted to do was give you some insights into what are we seeing Internet of Things is doing to the utilities market. Okay. Thank you very much. So from a problem perspective, what are the kind of key trends that we are seeing from a utility space? What are the key problems that we face? Utilities is a very important industry in every single market, but we are actually controlled by population, by the changes of economics, by GDP. There are many, many factors that actually hinder the types of changes that are going to be driving utilities. But there are some things that are very common across every single market, and those include things like regulation. We are hugely hindered by the speed at which we can do things because of the regulation that takes place in each of the markets that utilities need to operate in. We also see that there is a change to the way maybe the utilities industry is around being risk averse. they are risk averse. They have to be looking at how they can provide this service to each of the consumers and businesses in the home market. So they tend to be risk averse as well. So those kinds of challenges actually hinder the speed at which technology can be adopted in the utility space. But if we do not make those changes, we're not going to be able to see some of the value add that technology can really bring here. Things like becoming a much more reliable service, something that's much more transparent, something that also is going to be then servicing the customers in a much better way, providing them with a reliable, a real-time based build service that they're not able to achieve today. So what we're seeing at the moment is that there are about 40% of the renewables energy space is going to be growing by 2022. So that's another change, an economic change that we're seeing. So those types of things, as well as being much more carbon efficient, which is something that there's a big global program that each of the markets are contributing towards. Those two big things are also going to be impacting the way that we actually adopt new technology in utilities. So reducing carbon emissions, as well as looking at how we can provide a much better service to our customers. Can we move to the next one, please? So utilities today is set up in this is probably a type of diagram that you are all very familiar with. It's a classic national grid type of diagram and exists in most markets. Now, what we're going to be seeing here is a few changes where the power really resided within the national grid at this point in time, where you can see a typical type of setup. We're going to be seeing lots of changes taking place. Thank you. We're going to be seeing lots of changes taking place. There's going to be more sources of energy coming online. There's going to be more renewable types of energy. They could be solar power, they could be microgrids. So imagine if you are you have some buildings in an area where there is no infrastructure, but you have good flat roofs. Those could become sources of power for all of these remote areas. So solar power or microgrids are going to become much more popular, as well as wind farms, which I know that the NAMA group is already getting quite involved in at the moment anyway. So we're going to see an influx of new energy, but then there's also going to be new types of energy that's going to be consumed as well. So we're going to see changes to electric vehicles coming online. So there's going to be a change to how some of this power is going to be consumed. So where in a traditional grid, national grid, you see that maybe power consumption and delivery is in one direction, what you're seeing now, the trends that are changing, are that you're going to see new sources of energy being provided, so the supply can change, but then the demand is also going to change because how we are consuming energy is also changing. So now what you've really got a challenge with is how do you make sure that you are able to match the supply of energy to the demand that you're seeing, and if this is going to carry on changing every 2 to 3 years, you're going to start to see a change depending on how energy is going to be consumed. There's going to be a problem for the utilities providers because their biggest challenge is really going to be how do I match that supply and demand. So we're going to start to see some pain points emerge over here, but making sure that we can actually find ways to store surplus energy, allow for some of this additional energy generated to be transferred locally within different infrastructure areas, and also being able to see how we can control the demand side is really going to be where the utilities firms are going to be able to make the maximum difference. So how is IoT going to be able to change some of these things? So Internet of Things is a really interesting place to be. I really love it. It's a passion of mine. And we are seeing drastic changes taking place across many industries. And one of them is through a technology called Narrowband IoT. So in the space today around how we connect things, we use cellular technology. Cellular technology generally requires something that has power. It consumes a lot of energy, and you need some sort of signal to be able to connect to some of those assets. But in the utility space, there are many assets which are either underground, or they are in deep basements, or they are in environments that you do not have cellular coverage. So you are limited by cellular coverage. So Narrowband IoT is a low-power, wide-area network-based technology that does not require power, mains power. You can have battery power, but battery power that lasts for 15 years, so you don't have to go away and keep replacing this power. And it gives you the access to assets which could be deep underground, or they could be in places where you do not have traditional cellular coverage. So now all of a sudden, through Narrowband IoT or a form of low-power, wide-area network, you are able to connect assets that you have never been able to connect before. So this is really going to open up the market. So whilst all of these, you're going to see lots of trends coming through in the different topics you're going to be hearing today around cost reduction, around how do you get to optimize the delivery of the services that you're providing. But through technology like this, which is low cost, longer in battery life, and gives you access to arenas that you've never had access to before, all of a sudden it opens up so many new different types of services that you can ultimately be able to provide your customers. So Narrowband IoT for Vodafone is the biggest thing in Internet of Things. We get very excited about this type of technology. And specifically here for utilities, what's actually going to be happening is we're seeing that there are many benefits that are coming through. So I understand that the NAMA group have already been involved in enabling smart metering here, and it's fantastic because what this is really doing is it's giving customers real-time information. It's allowing you to build tariffs that are much more closer to the usage of what the customers are really using. And it's actually able to give the businesses improved business models as well as cost reduction. So the smart metering industries has actually already been around for more than 10 years. It wasn't called Internet of Things. And now with the badge of Internet of Things, it sounds really nice. But it's already been around for 10 years, and we've seen masses of improvements. But what we have also noticed is that it's still heavily regulated as well. So regulation really drives the speed at which smart metering can really take place, and at which and in each of the markets, how quickly you can then adopt this type of technology. So smart metering for utilities is one area that we see as a basic change coming through in most markets. Another area that we're going to start to see changes coming through is in the actual grid as well. So if we rewind back to some of the earlier slides that we had a look at, what are the things that are changing? We're seeing new sources of power, and we're seeing new types of power being consumed. Then this means there's going to be a change for the grid as well, because all of a sudden the grid is going to need to care about how is it going to manage this supply and demand, and how can the Internet of Things can really change this. So if they are able to use the narrowband IoT type of technology or any form of low power wide area network, then what they're able to do is connect to things, measure things that they weren't able to measure before. And with this type of information, they can do real-time monitoring. They can actually see things about to break or about to fail before it even happens. So this means that you become a lot more ahead of the curve. You are able to then provide a much better, improved service to your customers. And those service level agreements that you have with the various operators are more likely to be met because you are more informed. So Internet of Things for the smart grid is going to be changing in many ways. We're seeing things around power tilting. So if you've got these big grids, if you have a hurricane or you have a big issue in a remote area, you have no access or cameras to be able to film how these are still working. But if you've got these types of sensors that are able to measure, you will be able to pick up the signals of how some of these remote grids are still operating or not. So if you've seen that there's a change in weather pattern and it's going to impact the grid, you're able to then know that in advance, and you're able to send people out, your teams, to then go away and fix those problems before they become worse. So we're seeing that it's a preventative measure as well as providing an improved service. Other interesting things around manholes. So where you have deep cables going in the ground, or you have specific charging points in the ground, we're also noticing that those areas are really key for utilities providers to know how they are operating, because maybe they were installed so long ago that there could be some sort of deterioration in those different infrastructures that have been installed. So being able to use this type of low power wide area technology allows you to connect to those key pinch points in the network that you were not able to connect before. So huge improvement to operations in utilities in general, which then allows you to provide a much more improved service across the board. So what does this mean? So you've connected so many endpoints that you were not able to connect to before, and you've got a lot more data. So this means you can do something with this information that you now have, and this will probably segue very nicely into some of the topics that you will be talking about around big data and also blockchain later on. But here specifically, what we're really thinking about is how are you able to then trade some of this supply that you've been able to generate, and how are you able to trade? How does that trading start to take place? Because you've got much more information, you're then able to develop services that are predictive, you're able to tailor them to customers, you're then also able to exchange some of that data that you were not able to have before, and you're creating new types of services for your clients, or maybe even for other operators that you didn't necessarily have in the past. We're seeing machine learning to be able to take a big role here. So as things become much more predictive, you're able to then develop many more patterns that also allow you to use this improved data and service that you have across the board. So another area that we see a good amount of change is around water and gas. So you all know how it feels when you turn on the tap at home and the water doesn't come through. It's really painful because you expect that service now. You expect the water to be there. So if this is the type of world that we live in, where we expect these types of utilities to be always on, how do we make sure that there isn't a break? How do we make sure that there isn't going to be a problem? And if there is a problem, how do we make sure we fix it immediately? Thinking about when you don't have water supply, when you have Eid, is it's something you do not want, because it's an important day. People are enjoying themselves. So these are specific points in time in the year that you do not want your water supply to be off in any of the different cities that your consumers and your people are in. So things like being able to measure water pump flow, measure when there is a break, or measure when there is a possible challenge to the supply that you are supposed to be providing is really, really important. So we've seen that there's a big take-up in monitoring pipes. And these could be gas pipes or they could be water pipes. And it's very, very simple. It's just monitoring flow and it's monitoring pressure. And these types of data points are then able to give utilities providers that extra information that they didn't have before so that they can provide a break fix a lot more sooner. So that time it takes to provide that fix is hugely reduced. And what it means is that the ultimate service that you're providing your customers is going to be a lot better. So the day on Christmas Day when I didn't have water in London, in Hampton, for a whole day was really, really painful. And, and having services like this would have meant that maybe my utilities provider would have learned that there was a problem coming well in advance. So things like that for the consumer where we have a real painful problem, through this type of technology, that remote monitoring becomes really key. So we're seeing that monitoring pumps, monitoring things underground, monitoring things that you've never been able to do before just because the technology now exists is the big fundamental change in Internet of Things. So one thing we haven't spoken about is people. So we've talked about pipes, we've talked about the actual services, we've spoken about infrastructure, but there is an aspect of digitization that takes place on the people side as well. So how do you make everything much more safe for your workers? So there's a big aspect of worker safety. So how do you make sure that people who are going deep in the ground or going out into a remote site are actually safe? So there's a big drive around providing lone worker safety. There's also aspects around how do you actually optimize your workforce. So instead of having a number of people that were supposed to be allocated to a particular task, if all of these assets are now talking to you and they're giving you that data around where the problems might be through the remote monitoring software that you might be installing, then what you really need to be thinking about is how do I actually match that with the right number of staff? So you're going to start to see a cost reduction in workforce as well as improving workforce safety. So lastly, what I wanted to really talk about was, with all of these things coming together, what you've ultimately been able to do is you've been able to improve customer service. Customer service is the key driver here, and being able to provide them with a real-time service, real-time data, tariff plans that are actually matched to their usage, and your customers are able to know the utilities that they're actually consuming, are the key things that are changing across the globe. All underpinned by this technology through narrowband, 5G, and cellular. So the three key takeaways here really are: the network is really important depending on the assets you want to connect to, wherever they may be. You do need something that's going to be central, that's going to connect to all of these assets so that you can exchange that data between them. And ultimately improving that end-to-end customer experience is going to be the thing that is really going to take the utilities market into the next stages. Thank you.